Every day, every single day, things are happening in the world of deals and deal makers. And there's never enough time to keep up with every company, transaction, announcement, or whatever. It's just exhausting. And we have a new product to help fix that. This is Axios Pro Deals, a new premium subscription product bringing you tailor-made insights like never before. For the last 5 years, Axios has helped deal professionals navigate the whole deal landscape with Pro Rata. With Axios Pro Deals, we're diving deeper into the industries that matter most to you. You just want stories on fintech? There's a newsletter for that. MedTech deals? We've got you covered. The future of retail? We'll guide you. With Axios Pro Deals, you're going to be getting all of this industry-specific insight and expert analysis at a level you simply can't get anywhere else. So if you're a venture capitalist, private equity investor, banker, trader, founder, executive, anyone who cares about deals, Axios Pro is what you need to help you understand what matters and why. Start your free trial today at AxiosPro.com.
Welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios Capitol Hill reporter Julie Grace Brufke.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our event, Sustainability and Food Insecurity, where we'll dive into the roots of food scarcity impacting our country and the scalable and climate-friendly solutions to address these issues. To follow along with today's conversation on X, formerly Twitter, please use the hashtag #AxiosEvents. We'll kick things off this morning with a member of Congress who's played a major hand in shaping the Farm Bill. Please help me in welcoming House Agriculture Committee Chairman G.T. Thompson. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Grace, thank you very much.
All right, to kick things off, I know there's been some debate over on the Senate side between the chair and ranking member over whether to put more money into commodity programs or maintain conservation funds or bolster innovation and research. And I was kind of hoping we could get your take on what direction you'd like to see the bill go in.
Well, we need all of that, actually. There's just no doubt about it. All that American agriculture needs those types of investments. The commodity Title I of the Farm Bill, really is making sure that American farm families succeed. Because the simple truth is, if an American farm family fails, every American family will fail. And quite frankly, families around the country that through trade and humanitarian assistance where we provide assistance. So it is incredibly important. This inflation that we're experiencing, and I know it's down from 9 to about 5%, but it's still 5%. It's still make it really difficult to achieve a profitable margin for these farms. So Title I with reference prices, taking a look at basis, but as you mentioned, conservation, incredibly important. Those are the tools that have made the American farmer, rancher, forester, and processor actually in the end. But really the farmers and ranchers the carbon heroes of the world with what they sequester. And then you mentioned research, and it is, we are still well ahead of every other country when it comes to our agriculture, our productivity, our state of science. But other countries are catching us quickly because of the amount of money that they're investing in, and America should always stay in the lead.
So I know that the Farm Bill has a September 30th deadline. It's coming up. The House has kind of struggled to get its appropriations bill for ag over the finish line. I guess, how will you navigate that, and how will some of these programs be affected?
Well, the technical deadline is October 1st, right? It expires September 30th. The functional deadline, for the most part with this Farm Bill, is December 31st. December 30th, largely because there are a few programs like nutrition and some others that are mandatory spending. That will continue no matter what. There are others that are tied to the harvest season, to the growing season, and that really is the end of the year. There probably are a few things that come to a screeching halt on October 1st. But by and large with the Farm Bill, December 31st is probably the functional deadline. January 1st, we would revert back to Dust Bowl era language, and that would not be good for anyone. So looking hard to see, are there, the thing that we want to avoid is, with the expiration of September 30th or October 1st, is any significant disruption in a program that impacts the American farmer and American agriculture.
Has leadership given you any assurances on when a timeline on bringing up a Farm Bill would be?
I'll tell you what, I've never had leadership, quite frankly, Republican leadership in the majority or the minority leadership more supportive of a Farm Bill in my experience. The 15 years I've served on the committee. And so I am very appreciative of that. I think in general the Farm Bill is seen as probably the most promising bipartisan bill in the 118th Congress. And it's significant, the scope and the width, the breadth and depth of what we do in the Farm Bill and how it impacts not just rural America, but quite frankly, the American economy and national security. So time-wise, obviously we have to get through this current government funding, appropriations, whether it's a continuing resolution, which probably would be for a period of time first. And then there is a commitment and the support is there to get this Farm Bill done.
Now, I know some conservative members have kind of pushed back on on farm subsidies in the past. Can you speak a little bit to the benefits of investment in agriculture?
Yeah, well, first of all, the return on investment. When you think about the benefit, cost benefit, which is really a lens, is one lens that I look at the Farm Bill. The other one, obviously, is science, technology, and innovation. But the cost benefits, the return on investment, I mean, it's the number of jobs, the economic impact, quite frankly, the taxes that are generated in agribusiness industries to all levels of government, the foreign dollars that come in from through trade, the investment in an American farmer being a force for peace through the humanitarian assistance that we provide, like programs like Food for Peace, which is in the Farm Bill. My travels, it's very apparent to me that people with full bellies are less likely to engage in war and terrorism, right? It's a cleaner environment, it's a better climate. It really is food security and national security. So that's the benefit. The cost is less than 1.75% of what we spend nationally. I can't think of another investment by the American taxpayers that has in Washington that has a greater return on investment than this. And I think that's important for people to understand. You'd mentioned, we have a very obviously it's a conservative Republican Party. And those issues are important. Return on investment. The fact that most of this modern Farm Bill, this is a 2023 Farm Bill. This is not from the 1980s and 1990s, where I would best describe that as you take a pile of money and a grain shovel, and you take a shovel and you throw the money towards a problem and you hope it gets resolved. That's not this Farm Bill. This Farm Bill is built on some of the best examples of public-private partnerships, and the other thing that all members, and we're doing a lot of member education, Julie Grace, which is really important. I've got over 200 members of the House and a significant numbers of the members of the Senate that have never debated, deliberated, or voted on a farm bill. So member education is important. It's important that they understand that what the farm bill is about national security because of all the things that American agriculture does to make this country resilient.
So you mentioned that there's been an agriculture trade deficit. Does the Farm Bill present any opportunities to kind of begin to course correct on that?
No, absolutely. Let me just say that the Biden administration was really slow when it came to agriculture trade. Agriculture trade is really what helps balance that trade balance sheet, right? With what we trade to other countries in terms of agriculture commodities. But I was really pleased with the Biden. 2 years, took 2 years, but they put two individuals in key roles. These key roles were left empty when it came to trade. Assistant Secretary of Foreign Agriculture and Trade, and also at USTR, the Chief Agriculture Negotiator. Couldn't ask for two better people in those roles. So a slow start for agriculture trade, and I think that's why our trade had slipped. But I couldn't think of two better people. I'm really thankful that the Biden administration put these two individuals in place. The Farm Bill does directly, it gives us somebody to work with, right? Somebody to communicate with, somebody to say, you know what, let's continue the efforts of the previous administration. This is about America. This shouldn't be the policies between one administration and another when it comes to, for example, Kenya and the UK. I mean, we ought to be pursuing trade on the African continent, and certainly with the UK, now they're out of the European Union. The European Union is another place that obviously continue to build those relationships. And now I have the committee and myself specifically, we have people that we can go to in the administration that can help make that happen. And in the Farm Bill, there are two programs that are still being funded at the level of which they were created. So the Market Access Program and the Foreign Market Development Program, tremendous tools to help with foreign trade of agriculture. And if there's one thing I've heard in the past 2.5 years, as I've done kind of a barnstorming tour of rural America, I think I've been somewhere around 37 states and one territory, Puerto Rico here a couple weeks ago. Increasing that investment in FMD and MAP would really be helpful of helping to generate greater trade, and which obviously helps those countries meet their nutritional needs. At the same time, it brings all those foreign dollars into the United States economy, which is a really, really important thing to have happen.
Now, you've stressed during hearings that agriculture can be defined by science, technology, and innovation. What role do you see innovation playing in this year's Farm Bill and American agriculture generally?
Well, Julie Grace, that's the lens of which I've looked through that I identify agriculture. I define American agriculture, quite frankly, as science, technology, and innovation, and it always has been. Even those early settlers, it was pretty crude and rudimentary originally. They unloaded their wagons in a port and they headed west, and they stopped in places like Pennsylvania and said, fertile valleys, great water, this looks like home. And they unloaded, they built, they farmed, they grew their families. Some of those wagons kept going, and I've been in places where before irrigation, I got to wonder, the only reason they stopped is because the wheels fell off on the wagon. Right? With irrigation, they're a breadbasket. But they used innovation, right? It was crude and rudimentary. It was simple trial and error, but their purpose was righteous. It was to generate enough additional food so more family members would survive until the next year. That's a concept we can't really fathom today in the United States of America. It's an issue in other parts of the world today with starvation and famine. And so one of the charges I gave to all 6 of the subcommittees as we formed those and I appointed the subcommittee chairs is that we need to look through the lens with every subcommittee, from nutrition to commodities to forestry to all of them actually, applying the lens of science, technology, and innovation. because we want to build a farm bill that just doesn't serve the American people and the American farmer through 2023 through 2028, which would be the 5-year span of this farm bill. We want it to become a platform for the future. We want to be a platform for whatever's over the horizon, which I'm sure we may not be able to know what that is, but it'll be very exciting. One of the things that we want to do by accomplishing that, one of the metrics, which a few years from now I'll measure my success of my leadership or not on the Farm Bill, is that have we created the type of Farm Bill programs, have we done the refinements, have we identified the priorities in a way that we take what we already have, and that is American agriculture productivity has increased 287% since the 1940s. Now with inflation, it's down to closer to 280%, I'm told. My goal is with this Farm Bill, through innovation, science, and technology, we take that productivity to 400% since the 1940s by the year 2035. And we can accomplish that. Absolutely confident that we can make that happen with all the partners, the land-grant universities, the non-land grant agriculture colleges that we have, the great organizations that are working in biotechnology and conservation and efficiency and productivity and soil health. Just the gamut of the agriculture family.
So I guess the last question for you, of this year's Farm Bill, in contrast to past Farm Bills, I mean, what do you think are the most critical provisions that are in there that you guys have been kind of advocating?
Well, the critical provisions would be reflecting where we're at in 2023, right? And that is the difficulties that are those families that provide our food are facing. So that's the inflationary costs, the Russia, Ukraine, Belarus situation, which has decreased our access to some of our imported fertilizer you need to increase productivity, and with increased productivity you can feed more people. So it's the inputs. It's the EPA that in the worst of times when we have this situation, this war that Ukraine has mounted, which has prevented food coming out of the Ukraine, the EPA sidelined their scientists and demonized for political purposes a lot of crop protection tools. I mean, so our priorities are the priorities and the realities of the American farmer. And so things like Title I, reference prices, now those costs, the price per commodities have come up, but we're still looking at that. We're waiting on data from the Congressional Budget Office. We've given them a number of proposals. USDA has been pretty good with their technical assistance, but we need more of that to come in. Climate is the impact of climate, and therefore the looking for tools to be able to sequester carbon, and to in agriculture, nobody does it better than the American farmer, right? They are the carbon heroes. 6.1 gigatons of carbon sequestered annually, 10.1% more than what they admit. They truly are the carbon heroes of the world. There was a finding within the research where that data came from that I loved. It said if on this day in September of 2023, we wanted to decrease carbon emissions around the world, all we would have to do is for the American farmer, rancher, and forester to produce more and export it overseas. And it's because American agriculture is science, technology, innovation, and it's not static, it's dynamic, so it will improve as we provide more tools to be able to do that. I mean, there's a lot in the Farm Bill that would address the priorities of 2023, and that's what we're working hard to do. That's why we worked so hard to interact over the past 2.5 years. We have brought more feedback from American farm families than any time in the history of farm bills being prepared. Between that and the portals that we do with members, the portals for the public, the hearings we've had on Capitol Hill. So I'm very optimistic, very positive that in the end, I will achieve my goal, at least somewhat, that this will be a bipartisan, bicameral bill that will be highly effective.
Well, Congressman, it looks like we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to have you back soon.
Julie Grace, my pleasure. Anytime. Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Good luck with the rest of the day.
give a warm welcome to our View from the Top moderator, Nicholas Johnston.
I'm the publisher of Axios. Nothing that we do at Axios would be possible without the support of our partners. The investments that we make in journalism around the United States, great events like this, delicious snacks here, all of that is thanks to our great partners. And so I'm hugely, hugely grateful to the Mosaic Company for making this morning's conversation about sustainability and food insecurity possible. And so I want to welcome to the stage for a View from the Top conversation, Mosaic's Senior Vice President of Growth and Strategy, Walt Precourt. Walt, welcome to Axios. Good morning.
Great to be here.
So let's start big picture. Like, what is the importance of talking about food sustainability and insecurity to start?
Well, I think we face some really big challenges, Nick. Let's start with population growth. Today we have about 8 billion people. It's projected to grow to 9 billion by 2050. There's another interesting stat that I think we should be mindful of, and that's about a calorie gap. And we expect that calorie gap to grow by 50% between now and 2050. So in order to deal with that, let's leave the big statistics aside. In order to address that deficit, we'd have to deforest land about twice the size of India to solve that problem. Obviously not a sustainable solution. And then we add the context of extreme weather, so floods, droughts, water constraints, arable land constraints. And there's a big challenge, but with big challenge comes big change. And I think American ag is extremely resilient and creative. And if we bring all the stakeholders together, as the congressman just talked about, I think we can solve it.
I mean, he mentioned that sort of like innovation and scientific progress is a key part of that. So let's unpack a little bit. I love the phrase calorie gap. Mm-hmm. What steps need to be taken to help close that? It can't just be more farms, cutting down more trees. What is the technological, I guess, aspect of closing that gap in your head?
Yeah, so I think the theme is really about doing more with less. And what if we just start with the premise that we could increase yield by 20 to 30%? And first you say, well, like, how do you do that? Let's just take some real life analogies that we all know. Think about what an Olympic athlete does in terms of working on their mind, their diet, their exercise regimen, to get more out of the human body than average people are able to do. And the direct analogy to thinking about agriculture is how do we think about advanced crop nutrition that can really work with the soil, drive a stronger, what we would call microbiome, or the biologicals in the soil. You start with a great soil, you got a better chance of having a more robust plant. You manage that plant really well, and you're going to get greater yield. And I would drive this point home with, some of you may be familiar with a national corn competition. Average corn yields in the U.S. are about plus minus 200 bushels an acre. And that competition, the best farmers get 500 to 600 bushels an acre. Granted, they're babied and well taken care of, but there is a 20 to 30% sliver that we can go after with technology, innovation, and better practices.
And that's that looking at almost like, again, these are some good metaphors here. So like looking at a farm almost as an athlete that you can train, that like you can look at the inputs and the outputs to increase that kind of yield. So let's bring that into the Mosaic Company. Tell us a little bit about where your company sits at that nexus.
Yeah, so the mission at Mosaic is to help the world grow the food that it needs. And for those of us who work there, it's much more than a mission statement. It's really about our place in agriculture and, frankly, our role in society to help do more. Fertilizer itself contributes about 50% of crop yields. So I think it's a really critical part of solving the overall challenge, but not something that any one company can do by itself.
So what are the interesting things that are sort of coming down the pike from your vantage point?
Yeah, so maybe we could start with some really good practices today and then talk about the extreme, like what's really out there if we lean into this. So there's a program called the 4R Stewardship, which I know several of folks in this room have put the better part of a decade plus in working into getting that adopted. Very simple. What is 4Rs? It's about putting down the right product in the right place in the right amounts at the right time. And, okay, so what does that have to do with this conversation? Well, let's take this home. I went to grad school for environmental engineering probably before half the room was born. And when I studied that, there was the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, the hypoxic zone, which was a growing problem, and there was no clear way to solve that. Actually, this 4R program that farmers have continued to adopt have started to shrink that zone. And now there's technology, we call them biologicals, that are just starting to come to market that can do more efficient use of fertilizer, so less runoff. So imagine now you leap this up on a bit of steroids.
Right.
And then there's what I consider the holy grail of agriculture, which is really reducing nitrogen use, because it's the biggest single driver of greenhouse gases that there is. And there's work going on today to help corn and other row crops be able to fix or take out of the atmosphere half of the nitrogen that they need. That would radically change the world, not only from an agricultural perspective, but from a greenhouse gas perspective.
Well, I mean, that's like kind of a focus here. Like, it's not just about closing the calorie gap. This is about food insecurity and sustainability. So
exactly.
What else can you tell us about the efforts, like how those things go hand in hand? Are there, similar to that, the nitrogen idea of pulling that?
Yeah, so there are other things that tie into this. Today, farmers will use drones and other imagery to look at crops kind of as surrogates for how are those crops doing, let them apply different products to manage the crops more efficiently, but it's all proxy. We're actually partnering with a university today to develop thumbnail sensors that are biodegradable, cost pennies to make, that can be put down in row crops to actually directly measure the amount of nutrients in the ground, which would then allow the farmer to precisely place what they need where they need it. And there's a next generation on top of that where folks are looking at how do you have plants directly signal, and light not visible to the naked eye, that, hey, we're stressed, we need a little bit of nitrogen here, or we need some potassium over here. I mean, these things drive efficiency in such a different way. And I think we're on the cusp of the next big revolution. I mean, we're not a field like computing technology where things move fast every 2 years. Synthetic nitrogen was first produced about 100 years ago commercially. Then it took all the way to the 60s to get to the green revolution. And then all the way to the 90s to have seed traits really drive production. And I think with AI and what we know about genomics, we're probably 5 or 6 years away from the next big breakthrough.
We're on the cusp of another huge leap about that. And then what kind of impact do you think that would have? I mean, are you seeing like similar to the Green Revolution, which was like massive as far as both increasing the amount of crops and like holding that calorie gap?
Yeah, I think it changes the game. But to make all of that happen, I think we have to go back to where the congressman actually began his conversation. Is we actually have to treat agriculture like a national asset, a collective priority, and we've got to drive some policy changes to make that happen.
Well, this is the perfect segue. You know, I love these events in Washington because the folks who get up early for this are the folks who really care about this as a topic. These are the people who write the policy, or at least think they write the policy. So as a practitioner in the field, like, what is the advice? How can they help?
So the first policy place I would go is let's think about what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing in the area of green energy. And the congressman mentioned that we are adding more funding in agriculture, but I think we could relate what we're trying to do with climate change and agriculture and put more money into things like some of these nitrogen fixation products, because they are a ways away and not one company can solve it on its own. The other big thing is we've got to think about the fact that technology is outstripping regulations, as it is in many areas. But I'll give you an example. That product that we're working on to fix nitrogen, we're having to trial that in Brazil because there's no clear regulatory pathway in the US, and there is a clear pathway in Brazil. And again, building on the congressman's earlier statements, while we are in the lead in agriculture, there is a risk. Brazil is actually adopting new farm practices at the highest compound annual growth rate of any geography. You have younger farmers coming in, and we're struggling to attract younger farmers in the US. So these are challenges that are there. But I guess where I would kind of like to wrap this up and tie the story together is big challenges drive big changes. And the energy that I get when I go to an event we call it an Ag Tech Day. We do it with a university in Illinois, and I'm not picking on any one university. It'd be like calling out a college football team, get yourself in trouble. But when you see the innovation that's happening, not just ours, what competitors are doing, what students are doing, what agronomists are doing, you can see that the world of agriculture is going to change and yields are going to go up. But it's going to take us working together from the policy side, from the government side, from the farmer, all of us. But I think for ag, the best days are yet to come.
It's like, and I think the folks in the room need to realize it's moving a lot faster
Yes.
than you think it used
Yep.
to be. All right, we're about to get the hook here. Axios tradition, we end on one fun thing. You are now based in Tampa. Your prior posting, however, was probably the most un-Tampa town in all of all of North America, Saskatchewan, which was better. What are the best differences?
If you love winter and you love to snowshoe, I moved to Saskatchewan in October and there was snow on the ground till May. It was great to leave. My timing's not very good because we moved in Sumter, Florida. Both are great places. Both have great farmers.
Very good diplomatic answer. Well, thanks so much for making today happen.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Introducing me, Axios host and editor, Nyla Boodoo.
Good morning. It's great to see you all here today. Thanks for joining us. We've already heard from a member of Congress, and so now we wanted to pivot to the Biden administration and to our Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. Please welcome him.
Good morning.
Good morning, Secretary. Thank you for being with us.
You bet. Morning, all.
So we were just talking about the timing of the Farm Bill, and I wanted to start with that. Given if we go to next week without a new Farm Bill, what are you preparing for in your office if that expires?
We're going to continue to do what we've done. Look, we're going to get a Farm Bill. It's just a question of what will the Farm Bill be, right? It's not a question of when. It's going to happen. And I'm hopeful that as we craft this Farm Bill, that we understand that it's one of many tools to be able to help agriculture, American agriculture, move to the next iteration. We're deeply concerned at the Biden administration about the consolidation of farmland and of farm profit. And the reality is that small and mid-sized farming operations have had a difficult time. We had a record year in farm income last year, best year in the history of the United States, but 89% of that revenue went to the top 7.5% of farms, which meant that 92.5%, 2 million farms had to share 11% of profit. That makes it really difficult for small and mid-sized producers. So as we look at the Farm Bill, as we look at the other tools available to the Department of Agriculture, we're trying to create new revenue streams for those small and mid-sized producers. So one key element is maintaining the funding and resources for climate-smart practices through the Inflation Reduction Act, the ability to preserve the conservation resources and the ability to conserve the resources that are dedicated to sustainable aviation fuel, dedicated to renewable energy production, and the transition of rural co-ops to renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuel generated energy. All of that is critically important. Maintaining the flexibility of the department to use the Commodity Credit Corporation as we have to help promote climate smart practices. So I'm hopeful that as Congress fashions the Farm Bill, they look outside of the Farm Bill as well, define the need, and then use all of the tools, not just simply the Farm Bill. I think there's a tendency in this town to think that everything has to fit within the four corners of that Farm Bill. There's the Commodity Credit Corporation, there's the Inflation Reduction Act, there's the budget, there are programs that help local and regional food systems, there are programs at NRCS to help promote climate smart practices. So all of that has to take place. So as Congress does its work, we're going to continue to do our work to make sure that we support production agriculture, but that we also provide a better opportunity for more income and more income streams for small and mid-sized producers.
When you're thinking particularly about small and mid-sized producers, I wonder if we think about the effect of climate change and weather and what that's having, particularly, I'm thinking about milk production and when there's weather events and farmers aren't able to get that out there, right? Like, how are you all thinking about helping them in that way?
I would say three principal ways. First, making sure that our regular programs at NRCS are being used in a way that we know will help mitigate or allow farmers to adapt to a changing climate. Secondly, continuing to promote the development of climate-smart agriculture and forestry commodities, a new commodity type commodities that are grown and raised and produced with climate smart practices. Tried and true way to do this, you essentially de-risk the adoption of climate smart practices. You essentially provide the resources for farmers to try climate smart practices. We know that there's anywhere from 75 to 100 different practices. Then create a premium or an incentive, a market incentive for farmers to produce those commodities. And then basically measure and monitor and verify and report the results of those activities, which will allow farmers not only to benefit from the premium that they'll get from growing this new commodity, climate smart commodity, but also participate fully and completely in carbon markets and other ecosystem service markets. That develops a new stream of income for farmers. So you have a value-added opportunity that hadn't existed before. 141 projects now being funded through the Commodity Credit Corporation. Every major commodity, every state in the country is participating in this, and we're now seeing thousands of farmers embracing this opportunity. So making sure we do that, and then making sure that we also encourage farmers to look at the opportunities to produce their own energy on farm, to do it in a way that not only reduces their energy costs, but potentially allows them to pool renewable energy from the neighborhood, from farmers working collaboratively and cooperatively, and make it easier for the rural electric cooperatives to transition as they transition from fossil fuel generation to a more renewable source.
And so as we talk about food production, in particular this idea of climate smart agriculture, you mentioned the farmers that are interested. You've had increased funding within the IRA. I wonder what you're hearing from farmers about subscribing to that program in particular.
Well, as you know, there were 4 programs that were supported with this money. The Congress directed us to invest $850 million across the EQIP program, the CSP program, the RCPP program, and the easement program. The demand is extraordinary. We got 3.5 times the amount of demand than we have money. In other words, if you take all 4 programs and the application process that's taken place, you're going to see $2.5 billion of requests for the $850 million. So it's very clear that farmers are interested and anxious to utilize these increased resources to do a better job in terms of allowing them to mitigate and adapt to a changing climate and take advantage of new market opportunities, and to also look at ways in which they can potentially lower costs and mitigate, as I say, the consequences of climate. So demand has been remarkable. High demand for EQIP, high demand for CSP, encouraging interest in our easement program, and a dramatic increase in the number of regional conservation partnership program applications, which is good because we're looking at a significant increase under the IRA in future years. So we see the demand is there, we see the interest is there, we just want to make sure the resources are there.
And this is obviously a voluntary, incentive-based approach to this. Do you feel like that's the right way to go here?
Well, I think in the U.S., I think that is the most effective way. The reality is, if you want farmers to adopt new ways of doing business, you have to figure out ways to incent that activity. They will respond to incentives. We've seen that with the Climate Smart Agriculture Commodity Initiative. We had $1 billion initially. We put it out for folks to apply. We were blown away with the number of applications. We got over 1,000 applications, extraordinary partnerships between farm groups, conservation groups, environmental groups, major food companies, major retailers coming and banding together along with universities and colleges, minority serving institutions, all committed to working together. 1,000 applications, $20 billion in requests. So I think the demand and the interest is there, and I think this has been the way in which farmers have responded in the past. I mean, we have hybrid seed in large part because a guy by the name of Garst convinced a guy by the name of Wallace, who started a Pioneer Seed Company, to give the seed away for a year or two. Let farmers see the increased productivity, then the product will sell itself, and I think that's what we're going to see with climate smart agriculture.
So we're here today to talk not just about sustainability, but food insecurity. And when you are talking to people, particularly lawmakers, about the link between climate change and food insecurity in the U.S., how do you explain that?
Well, I explain it in large part by focusing on the fact that farmers take a great deal of pride in knowing that they're not only feeding themselves and their friends and neighbors in this country, but also the world. And we need and have a responsibility, given the incredibly productivity of our land in the United States. We have a responsibility to respond. to the growing climate crisis and the link that it has, making it more difficult for developing countries to produce what they need to produce for their own people. That requires, I think, not only a commitment to the food programs that we have at USDA and USAID, but it also, I think, requires a renewed commitment to agricultural research. I mean, the reality is, in order for us to continue to be productive, in order for us to share the awareness of new technologies and new practices, and frankly, to learn as well from developing countries. I think there are practices that are indigenous knowledge here in this country and elsewhere that could be helpful to us in terms of our own ability to maintain productivity. So to do that requires, I think, a commitment to research. I'm hopeful that we see a renewed interest in agricultural research and an increased investment over time in that.
I want to get back to the research in a second, but I just want to ask you, when we're thinking about domestic food insecurity and how much of that as it relates to climate change, is this something that government action should be changing versus private industry when we're just thinking about all the pieces of the puzzle here?
Well, I think it's important for there to be a collaborative effort between the government and the private sector. I think it's important for the government to continue to look for creative ways to encourage the private sector to be engaged. At the same time, I think we have a basic responsibility to our citizens, as those who are financially struggling, to help them get through a tough patch. I think there are two opportunities here. One is we want to continue, obviously, to support our nutrition programs, the SNAP Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and make sure that folks who are qualified for that program get the benefits of that program. I think the fact that we're extending a summer feeding program for children who are free and reduced lunch is an indication of our commitment to that. So we want to maintain the funding and resources and the commitment there. I think we also want to look for ways in which the government, as it's purchasing food, as it's supporting those families, also finds a way to support small and local and regional producers. In other words, in order to buy food for the food banks or for school meal programs, shouldn't we spend a significant amount of that resource buying from local producers so that you're stimulating the local economy, you're providing additional revenue sources for those small and mid-sized producers, keeping them on the farm and in business? It's important for rural America and for the rural economy to do that.
You mentioned SNAP benefits. As many as 3 million college students were added to SNAP benefits during the pandemic when the USDA expanded eligibility. Many now face losing those benefits. How do we address food insecurity in particular when we're thinking about, you mentioned children, but what about college students, especially as we're thinking about the school year beginning?
Well, I think it's important to understand who those college students are and how things have changed a bit about who's going to school. And I think we find an increasing number of students who are struggling financially or may themselves have family members and children that they're raising and taking care of while trying to get that education, which is why I think we looked at ways in which we could provide help and assistance. One way that we're currently working is working with colleges and universities for them to understand their responsibility to their own students and making sure that there are ways in which food pantries and so forth can be supported. I was at Fort Lewis College in Colorado. It's a college that serves primarily Native American students. They've established their own little food pantry, and there's opportunities at USDA for grants and resources to be able to support that kind of activity while Congress makes a determination of whether or not to expand coverage of SNAP to college students.
Mm-hmm. A report from the Capital Area Food Bank here in DC last week showed that 3/4 of residents polled who were food insecure were employed. I think so much of the political conversation around government benefits around food continue to focus on work requirements. How do you navigate that?
Well, I think, first of all, to make sure that everybody understands that there is a work requirement. I think a lot of folks sometimes in Congress believe that there isn't a work requirement. There is, in fact, a work requirement. And that work requirement, I think, once you understand it, I think you become more comfortable with the program. I'm very pleased with the fact that when Congress took a look at work requirements in the debt ceiling decision and settlement and agreement, they essentially understood that there were some that it would be unfair for a work requirement to be placed, like homeless veterans, for example. These folks are struggling, coming back from conflict. They find themselves homeless, and it's pretty difficult to ask somebody in that circumstance to go find a job. And so I think the fact that we've now exempted certain groups from that work requirement is, I think, a recognition that you really have to understand who we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. We're almost out of time. I just want to ask you really quickly, as we've been talking about college students and you've been talking about research, what you're seeing in terms of the labor pipeline for the next generation of farmers and food scientists.
We invested resources from the American Rescue Plan in what we refer to as Learners to Leaders program, an opportunity, I think, for us to focus on the next generation, particularly in minority-serving institutions. We think there's a tremendous wealth of talent that we need to tap more effectively. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. I think the best days of American agriculture are ahead. I think the climate challenge is also an enormous opportunity, and I think American agriculture is actually going to lead the effort to a net zero future, not just within agriculture and internationally, domestically and internationally, but also I think could potentially be the first element or first segment of our overall economy to get to net zero first.
Secretary Vilsack, I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today here at Axios. Thank you very much. So one of the threads we've been talking about today has been innovation. In our final segment, we're going to dive deeper into the world of special projects and innovative techniques when it comes to sustainable farming and food practices. Our next guest is the Executive Director of the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. Their goal is to create a more climate-friendly agricultural approach when it comes to regenerative farming or tending saltwater crops. That's the kind of research that they fund. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Sahara Moon Chapatin. Thanks for being with us. So I was just talking to Secretary Vilsack about the Farm Bill and in particular food insecurity across the U.S. How much do you worry about, when it comes to food insecurity in the U.S., how much do you worry about things like climate change versus food costs and inflation in the economy?
Well, that's a great question, and there's certainly a very clear linkage between climate change and food security, both in the United States, as you said, and of course globally. Food prices around the world are connected, and climate can have huge shocks on our food system. I think we saw during the COVID pandemic how that was a shock to our food system. And you have droughts, you have rising temperatures, and yes, that can have a clear impact in terms of the affordability of food and also the availability of certain foods in the grocery store.
Mm-hmm. So we were also talking about SNAP benefits and reduced eligibility. How do you see the role of programs like that in solving food insecurity across the U.S.?
Well, they're obviously incredibly important. So SNAP is one tool among many that we have to ensure that families can get access to affordable, nutritious foods. Our organization works at the other end. We're working on the research that's needed to ensure that the food is there, that there's more nutritious food available, that it's available in communities where it's needed, that families can go to the grocery store and that they can afford foods and not just sort of the cheapest foods on the shelf, but that they really have choice and nutritious foods that they can bring home to their families.
Right, and so far today we've been talking so much about the government sector and about laws. I wonder how crucial you all, and I wonder if you can explain a little bit more about your role with the private sector when it comes to sustainable agriculture and creating these public-private partnerships.
Sure. So FAR was established by Congress in 2014, in the Farm Bill actually, to support agriculture research through public-private partnerships. So we were given the mandate of forming these partnerships to fund the research. Every dollar we get from the Farm Bill, we match it with a non-federal dollar. And we've actually really exceeded that mandate and leveraged $1.40 from non-federal sources for every dollar. So with that, we fund agriculture research across the spectrum, from supporting producers to be able to produce the nutritious, sustainable foods that America needs without cutting into their own bottom line, all the way through working with food companies and thinking about food science and technology and the sustainability of agriculture.
And when we think about the role of private industry, how much are, I'm thinking large corporations like something like a McDonald's, how important is that private sector influence in sustainable agriculture?
It's tremendously important. So the private sector, from companies like you mentioned, food companies like McDonald's, all the way through to input companies, those who are supplying the seeds to farmers, they're making a tremendous investment in R&D all the time. And what FAR can do is work with them and redirect that R&D, that research and development investment, to generate a public good that everyone can have access to, not just that company. And what we found is companies are very excited and willing to work with us because working with FAR allows them to also work with each other. So we often will establish a consortium of numerous private sector companies in a particular area. For example, we have one in reducing antimicrobial use and making it more sustainable in animal agriculture. A bunch of different companies all realize this is a problem. Nobody wants to be the only one funding it because then everyone else gets to benefit from their investment. But by working with FAR, they can come together and jointly fund the research that's needed to help producers produce food more sustainably.
So what do you see as the most important food research projects that your organization is involved in? As you said, you all are kind of across the board here.
Oh, that's hard to pick the most important. We have so many great
ones. So let's
ones.
start with why don't we start with feedstocks and the food production? Yeah. How about that?
Yeah, so, well, let me start with animal agriculture.
Okay, let's start with that. Okay.
You think about animal agriculture, we know that it is tremendously important, especially for growing children, to have access to the right proteins. And in so many communities, that means some, whether it's eggs or dairy or meat, they have that need in a lot of places. And we know that animal agriculture can have a negative impact on the environment. And so our research is directly aimed at reducing the environmental impact of animal agriculture and helping producers to grow animals more sustainably, to grow them with better welfare in a way that doesn't change the bottom line for the producer, so they can still, have their family and earn a profit, but they can also ensure that those eggs on the shelf are going to stay at a price that's affordable for all families. And giving families those choices, they might want to choose that more sustainable product. They might want to choose that cage-free egg, for example, but they can't do it if it costs 3 times as much. And so really giving them those choices at the supermarket.
So let's stick with the animal production for a moment. You have you all help fund research for scientists that work on things like cow burping.
Sure.
Can you tell us more about what they're doing?
Yeah, so we actually put together a consortium called the Greener Cattle Initiative, and it brings together players across the cattle industry, beef and dairy, focused on the research that's needed to reduce methane emissions from cows, which is a huge contributor to climate change. And so there's research on the right kinds of feed, there's research on the genetics of the animals themselves, there's research on how you can manage your cattle to reduce that. And so through the research, and you look across, right, all the different ways that might pan out. And research is inherently something where you're trying different things and you're seeing which one. And it might be that we're going to need numerous approaches. A producer may end up having a different cow, feeding them something different and managing them in a different way. And all these companies have come together to jointly fund that research, recognizing that if we're going to continue to have animals as a productive part of our agricultural system, we need to ensure that they are not contributing to climate change.
Right. And Secretary Vilsack was just sort of mentioning particularly the small to medium-sized segment of the farming community. How important is scale for the things that these scientists are working on, as opposed to whether it's just like a small to medium-sized producer or much larger?
Well, that's the beauty of investing in the research for productivity, because there's so many different ways to go about it. If you think of an animal, and if you're breeding, say, a better cow or a better chicken or even better crops, a farmer can use that whether they're a small farmer with just a few animals or whether they're someone who has thousands of animals. That's scale neutral. If you're thinking about certain production practices and certain kinds of machinery, sure, if you want to use an enormous combine, you're going to need a bigger farm. So there's really, you can develop the tools and technologies that producers will need, no matter their scale or what size they are, because they all need access to new and innovative technologies.
Mm-hmm. When we're thinking about plant science in particular, can you share a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of innovation in that area?
Mm-hmm. Well, we were talking about the impacts of climate and extreme weather events on agriculture, and crops are at the forefront, right? If it's super, super dry or super hot, that's going to impact your yield. And there are wonderful new innovative technologies that we can bring to bear on that, where we have research partnerships that are developing new varieties of wheat or legumes like cowpea or soy, and trying to make them more climate resilient so that they're able to withstand a climate shock or a drought or the flooding like we saw in California this past year, and can still get a productive yield out of their crop. And so there's the full range of technologies you can draw on, whether it's breeding technologies, but then there's also the management. As we heard earlier, fertilizer is such an important component of this, and FAR's investing across that spectrum.
When you're thinking about, you're mentioning crops and creating sort of like seed resilience and plant resilience. How much can the U.S. learn from other countries that have dealt with this for, frankly, longer? When we're thinking about rice and flooding, and how many other countries have dealt with that for much a long period?
Well, I mean, agriculture is inherently a global field. Science is a global field. And I think we'll never be able to fully tackle the challenges we have here in the United States if we're not tapping into the vast richness of global science. And so our partnerships are often international in nature and bring scientists together from Europe, from Africa, from the United States, and bring them together to develop solutions. And that's how that cross-learning takes place. And in a previous career, I worked in international agriculture. And now I find that we're working with some of the same players, because when you think about all the different wheat varieties across the world that have grown in so many different climates, you want to better tap into that germplasm as you're breeding a better wheat variety for Kansas, which might also be the same wheat variety you would grow in the Punjab.
And what to your mind, are the biggest challenges to sort of international cooperation among scientists at this level?
I think there's, frankly, more opportunity than challenge. I think it's really exciting when you can bring, scientists want to work together. They are always they're the ambassadors for countries getting together and cooperating. Even countries that don't talk at a political level, the scientists will be working together. So I think there are tremendous opportunities there. I think the challenges comes when you have, you're trying to build collaborations between researchers, organizations that have different levels of capacity. And so, for example, if you're trying to bring a researcher from a very under-resourced organization in perhaps a small country and bring them working with some in the United States, then you have to think about how can they both be participating on an equal playing field, and which researcher might need just some resources to travel, and which researcher might actually need an upgrade in their lab to really fully participate.
How should we be thinking about global food production or global problems with food insecurity affecting us here in the U.S.?
Well, as I said, I think the prices of major commodities are going to be influenced by global shocks and global trade. And we saw that with the war in Ukraine, for example, and also with fertilizer issues. But as was mentioned earlier, the United States has a tremendous important role to play in producing food that can sustain the world and can, during times of shock, we do export food and we put food out through our humanitarian programs. And so the interplay there is very important. I think the United States has tremendous potential to increase its productivity and its sustainability and to be a major player in that. And I think we're also paying attention to what's happening in other places, and trade is important in both directions.
Dr. Chappenton, you've talked about how our biggest breakthroughs may well come from a convergence from a variety of all these disciplines that we've talked about today. I mean, scientists inherently often want to work together, but do you think that how can we better cultivate an interdisciplinary approach? Because that might be more of a challenge.
Yeah, no, I think it's both a challenge and very exciting. We often, and I think the scientific enterprise often thinks, well, I've got a crop researcher, so I'm going to go have them develop a crop project. And I've got someone over here studying soil, and so they're going to study soil. And what happens when you bring the crops person, the animal person, the soil person, and the social scientist together? And you say, all right, we've got this problem. We need to, say, make our farm more sustainable. How can they come up with solutions by working together from the get-go? And so that's what we're trying to do at FAR moving forward, is really thinking about incentivizing projects that bring those different disciplines together from the get-go to both formulate the problem and then design the solution, rather than sort of tacking on all the different disciplines at the end.
Are there examples of how you've already seen that work, or where you would love to see this happen?
I many years ago got to manage a project in South Asia that was bringing together so many different disciplines, including the policy researchers and the social scientists working across the Indo-Gangetic Plains. And just seeing the transformation that they were able to affect by really not just thinking about what's the new crop variety or what are we going to grow in this particular agro-ecosystem, but thinking about decision-making that a farmer is making decisions all day long, every day, all year long about what to plant, when to plant it, what machinery, what investment to make. And so really thinking about bringing that kind of interdisciplinary approach into how we transform our agro-production systems here in the United States, I think could be really powerful.
So at Axios, we like to end on one fun thing. I just wanted to ask, if this is sort of your day job, how does that affect the food that you make or eat?
Oh, well, I've got two little picky children at home. So we're in the beans and rice category. We do a lot of beans and rice, and so I'm always trying to, which is great. I happen to know from my work that that's incredibly nutritious, and if they're going to zero in on that, but I try to mix it up. I try to introduce them to other foods, and I try to help them understand where their food comes from.
Beans and rice are pretty good for picky eaters.
I do a lot worse.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you for joining us this morning, and to everyone at our live stream, we want to thank you as well for tuning in. Thank you to our audience in the room. And of course, thanks again to Mosaic for making today possible. You can head to axios.com/events for more details on where you can find our events next. Thank you so much.
Thank you.